Today on the Transplant Helper, I'm going to be sitting down to talk with Dr. Corinne Smorra. She's a licensed clinical social worker as well as a therapist. She works with an organization called Heart and Mind Counseling, and I promise you the services she offers to people like you and I, whether it be congenital and or transplant patients, one or the other or both, are absolutely a wonderful thing, and I want her to be able to tell you a little bit about that, tell you about the opportunity she is offering to give us a little bit of wellness a little farther than that of our physical wellness, and that is to help our minds and help us to deal with the emotional, the trauma, the all that comes along with as baggage, basically, the transplant / congenital patient life. So let's jump over in this Zoom call. Let's talk with Dr. Corinne, and I'll see you later. Stay tuned. Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to become part of the Transplant Helper community. So let's just kick this off really quickly by asking you, Corinne, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself as well as the services that you offer.
Absolutely. My name is Dr. Corinne Smorra, but I like my clients to call me Corrine. I feel that way we can kind of work together and relate to one another in more of a collaborative fashion because we're both doing some work when we work together.
Right.
I actually am a licensed clinical social worker. I have my doctorate in social work. And currently right now I'm licensed in the states of Alabama, Florida, and Michigan. I have my application in for Georgia right now to be reviewed. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll be licensed in Georgia as well.
Okay, so what exactly is your primary specialty? I know you said social worker / counselor.
Yes,
What exactly?
My specialty in the clients I work with are congenital and chronic disease, organ transplant, depression, anxiety, and grief, and any type of health issues. So that's really where I specialize. I fell into this because I actually was born with congenital heart disease myself. And when I called Adult Congenital Heart Association, when I was looking at what I was going to do with my third career, I found out that there was only 2 other people that specialized in congenital heart disease, from what they told me. One was in Ohio and one was in Canada from a psychosocial perspective. So I went to school and got my master's and my doctorate, and my specialty all the way was psychosocial issues for those with congenital heart disease. And as I started doing my research, it branched out into those with chronic disease, congenital disease, and there isn't a lot of research about congenital heart disease and psychosocial issues. So I started studying about people that experience asthma, diabetes, and things like cystic fibrosis, that is onset at birth. And then I started looking at what the difference was between a congenital disease and a chronic disease and trying to deal with those kinds of issues, which there is a big difference. Congenital heart disease or congenital disease clients don't remember when they ever felt, quote unquote, fully normal, as a chronic disease person that's been diagnosed with cancer does. So it's different issues to work your way through.
Well, like I've said so many times before here on the channel, I'm definitely someone who's been there and am currently doing that, in that I was born with a congenital heart defect. And I know as a child, there were a lot of restrictions that were placed on me as far as things I could and could not do, not able to participate in organized sports, didn't have the energy, didn't have the stamina that the other children did. And although I dealt with that pretty well, I can tell you there were many, many times when I could have used unknowingly, probably as a child, but particularly as a teenager, could have used services like yours, it sounds like.
And that's one of the things is even a teenager would be able to need some assistance, but also as we go through different life stages, we encounter different experiences that we have to overcome on hurdles. Being a teenager can be kind of maybe isolating sometimes because you can't participate in those organized sports. And maybe music isn't your interest. Maybe you do like sports, but you can only do so much. So those are frustrating experiences, especially when you're trying to make friends. But then you get into your mid-20s and you're trying to figure out college and what am I going to do for a career? And then you move on to your 30s and you're still dealing with this disease, but all of a sudden there's different things that come into play, like I have a family now. What happens if something happens to me? How do I care for my kids? How do I support my family if I have to have a surgery? So those are all issues we deal with. And then one of the things I've found is that there is not a lot out there in psychosocial modalities or what's been successful in helping this population. And I ended up coming up through grief counseling because we experience a lot of loss as we go through this process or as we navigate our journey of life. You know, whether it's a loss after a procedure, we may have a transplant, it might be successful, excuse me, but we also experience a loss. There might be something that we loved to do before, suddenly we can't. Maybe we're getting sick more often because, you know, our immune system is compromised because of the drugs we have to take, not to reject the transplant. There's just, or maybe you had a procedure and you're on Coumadin now. Now you can no longer wakeboard because you're could hit your head. So while you feel better, you're also losing part of something that is important to you as your identity. And those are all things we have to work through and deal with.
That's right. And that's one of the things that I guess you could say we generally learn the hard way. We don't see all of that coming, you know, and a lot of people, particularly from the outside, they think about congenital heart defects, or fast forward like I was when I was 38 years old, ultimately a transplant. They think about both of those cases. Well, you know, surely there's a surgery that can fix that, or even if it would be a surgery called transplant, that'll fix it. Everything will go back to normal. The person will never have anything to worry about. And I've done so many videos that basically come down to reminding us that, you know, we will be normal one day, but it very well may be a new normal. It may not be exactly what we have done in the past. And like you say, we do take a lot of losses at times as a result.
Yes, we do. And you know, we have to remember something too, that the build up to surgery is more like, I need to survive this surgery. We don't really think about life beyond surgery. We think about, okay, this is going to help, I hope, but I need to survive this surgery. I need to make it through. And so there's a lot of anxiety, right? As you start building up, like, I have to survive this surgery, and you go through a lot of mixed emotions. And it's very difficult when you're dealing with, you know, family and friends. So then you survive the surgery, right? And you experience a euphoria. I made it.
Yeah.
And then it comes down and it settles in, because all of a sudden you start realizing, okay, these are the changes I'm experiencing. I can do this, but I can no longer do this. I never realized this would happen because my focus was just getting through the surgery.
Right. And I think there's a little bit of a, I don't know what to call it other than there's a little bit of a high that comes with, after struggling for so much time, however long that wait was, struggling for so much time, then finally getting there. And
Yes.
then there's a little bit of a, it's not a letdown, it's just a reality check that, you know, things are different. I've got new struggles, and now I've really got to deal with all of it at once. There's not only the physical recovery that comes with transplant or any major surgery, or, you know, dealing with facing cancer and the treatments, all that could be combined. But there's not only that physical recovery, a lot of times there's a tremendous emotional recovery that goes with that, particularly when it comes to patients like I am, heart transplant. You could place lung in that, you know, any of those where we have to receive that gift from a deceased donor. There's a tremendous loss that comes in that when we think about the gravity of all that's taken place. Yes, our lives have been given to us, at least a renewed opportunity at life, but there's a loss on the other side. And like me, I carry part of that loss in me every day.
Yes, I don't want to identify or put an exact term on it, but I think there's a lot of mixed emotions you can feel. Maybe perhaps some guilt, because, you know, you're living and someone isn't. The other thing too is that you experience a euphoria or a relief that you made it through. And it's dealing with those mixed emotions along with a whole new regimen, perhaps, of medicine, a whole new regimen of how you need to conduct your life. You know, maybe some sports you can't do, some things you can. It's sometimes it can be something that you just have to kind of retool your identity in some respects.
Right. Right. And there's a lot of that comes in, and just kind of accepting what we face and being able to deal with that. And that's I think really where you come in, being able to help people and counsel people to go through some of that. So tell me a little bit about the actual services that you offer. I know one of the things that attracted me in the beginning when I first heard about you was you've got a variant of this where it doesn't involve face-to-face interaction. Say I'm in Alabama, you're off in another state. So tell me about that.
Well, one of the things is that there are only one other private practitioner that I know of that specializes in congenital heart disease. And when I did my research and spoke to congenital heart disease social workers across the US that are in the hospitals, they're getting new patients constantly. And they can't do an extended period of therapy with someone. They can do maybe 4 weeks, 6 weeks pushing it. But after that, they need to refer them out because their caseload keeps increasing.
Right.
So with the onset of telehealth, what I've done is started getting licensed in numerous states, because this way, those people that are searching and are having trouble finding a therapist that can relate to their specific situation and the experiences they go through, we can do it via telehealth. And this can give more access for people to get to me, and I can help more people instead of, focusing specifically on the one market I live in.
Right.
So so we do the therapy via Zoom. It's, there's a lot of modalities we can do, just chatting. I don't know if you all are familiar with the types of modalities that there are. We can do cognitive behavioral therapy. We can do solutions focused therapy. We can do psychodynamic theory. Also, just narrative therapy. But
Right.
the fact is just being able to talk to someone
Exactly.
that is trained and can help you is also very therapeutic. We get locked into a lot of modalities and specifics. And yes, evidence-based practice, what they call it, is very important. And I do use it, but there is a great amount of therapy that happens when you can just sit and talk to someone that you can tell everything to. You can't tell everything to your family. You can't tell them your fears and your concerns because you don't want to scare them. We carry, in a sense, a responsibility to make sure that, we don't alarm them and we internalize a lot. Or we'll have friends or family members that will say something and they mean well, but it's just not the thing to say.
Right.
It
Yeah, there are
really isn't.
a lot of I'll just
Yeah.
use the word I don't like my children use. They say a lot of stupid stuff sometimes, everybody does, including myself. I mean, but uh,
Absolutely.
there's a comfort in being able to speak with someone that's there to listen, I think, as much as anything.
There to listen, that won't judge you, that understands to some degree, because no one has the same experience. So we have to understand everyone's individual experience
Right.
and can look at it from a different perspective. I always like to say it's different when you're dealing with these things and you're in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you can step outside of the room and look through the windows and see what's going on, you have a different perspective. And that's what I bring in. I stand outside the room, look in the window, and I can break down everything and analyze it and look at it from a different perspective. And we can break these things down so that my clients can walk away with a different mindset or a different solution or a different way of looking at things in order to help them cope and build resilience so they can move on.
Right. Yeah, and that's a very good way of putting that. Just to be in the room and seeing it from a different perspective. I know one thing I've told several times here on the channel is about a period of time after my transplant when, even though I was recovering pretty well, I had a difficult time for a while, and for weeks, maybe even month or so, I'd lay around on the couch some days, and just in my mind, at least, I felt terrible. I kind of rewound in my mind and said to myself, hey, Jim, you lived 38 years with the heart you was born with. You were doing fine. Now look at you. You're on the couch. you had to transplant, but you're still struggling, not able to do anything. And one day, my wife, which she happens to be a licensed social worker as well, although she deals with different things than you do. She looked at me one day and she said, "Why don't you get up off the couch? Why don't you do something?" I said, "I feel terrible. I wish I'd never done this." Kind of a
Mhm.
perspective. And she snuck around, called one of my good friends. I didn't know about it at the time. He dropped by the house and knocked on the door. She went to the door. Of course, he walked in. He said, "Hey, do you want to go get something to eat?" And I got up off the couch like that. And, she saw that. She saw that a lot of what I was dealing with was not as physical as it was emotional. And I just needed someone to pull me out of that for a minute. And I can remember she explained that to me a little bit later after I got back home. She said, you needed to get out of your downtime. You needed to do something. And I think that's one of the things you could easily do for people is once they are able to talk and once they hear your perspective, that could be a game changer, right?
Yes, and the other thing when you talk about your kind of situation, I think part of it too is sometimes you just get worn out, right? I mean, it's a constant fight. And, to self motivate constantly to keep doing something, you just get sometimes you go through periods of being just tired,
Hmm.
tired of it all. And that's very normal. I mean, it's very understandable. And like your friend coming over and just saying, "Hey, let's go," it's just that kind of just that little adrenaline that you needed to kind of get yourself moving. And that's one of the things we talk about too is, not only do we look at the mental aspect of it, but we have to look at the body aspect of it too. And one of the things we have to keep in mind is okay, when we make it through these surgeries, mentally, that's great, but our body remembers all that trauma. Even though we're
Right.
under anesthesia, our body still recalls it. So there are some things physically we need to take in mind and keep in mind and do to help our body process those feelings because sometimes there is a little bit of a disconnect. Your mind's one place, but your body's saying, nope,
Hmm.
this is not happening right now. And we have to
Right.
understand that. So sometimes your body will just be like, "I'm just tired," or your mind will be like, "I'm tired."
Right.
And
It
that's
takes,
very normal.
oh, yes. And it takes so much out of us to go down this road and to go through this journey and know I can only speak for me as well as, well, I can probably speak for a couple thousand I've talked to as well in doing this channel, but we have to, because we have to face death sometimes in the way that we do,
Yeah,
because honestly, if you're a heart transplant recipient, you were only a heart transplant recipient because you were right there. I mean, you're
absolutely.
on a razor's edge between life and death. And many of us have been faced with you're not going to live through the week if this doesn't happen and such.
Yep.
And you have to prepare so much for that that coming out of it afterward is a huge trauma as well. Because I
It
know for
is.
me, I think in a sense, I went ahead and broke ties with my wife and my children and my parents and my friends and mentally. And so I've struggled. I'm 8 years out and I still struggle sometimes with getting closer relationships back because not that we've offended each other, but just I have a hard time going back there. I don't want to face that potential loss again. And
Yeah.
so what is that? How do people deal with that?
Well, I think that that's part of the grief, right? I mean, that's part of why I came up through grief counseling because we've all pretty much come so close to death. One of those, you need your surgery at this month, or we can push you out to 6 months, but after that, if you don't get that valve replaced or you don't get that transplant, you're not going to make it. And then you got to couple that with some of us have flatlined on the table,
Hmm.
right? So, that's another thing. You come out and like, well, we almost lost you. You flatlined. Well, you have no idea that happened. Or we had to bring you in again because you had an artery that started bleeding and you don't even know what happened. So you have those kinds of things that happen to you and you have to like just try to comprehend that and knowing you're still there and knowing that you've walked on the edge so many times. You get either fearful of grief or you get to the point that you just put up that fight, right? I'm not going to die. It's just not going to
Right.
happen. And you get so And that's just a mindset that a lot of people don't have to go with. And I like to compare sometimes that living with this kind of disease and these kind of issues is the equivalent to an Olympian training for the Olympics. That is the mental stamina we have, if not more, is that we have the mental stamina of every day, like preparing for the Olympics. Every day we get up, our energy level is definitely less than your normal average person experiences. We're constantly masterminds of our time management and our energy management combined. So those are some heavy duty responsibilities that we didn't ask for. They were put on us.
Right. Yeah, and there's no doubt we're all different, but in a sense, we're very much the same in that somewhere, somehow, there'll be some struggles, whether we're willing to admit those as readily or not. Now, one of the things that I've dealt with many times, and this speaks for me, my wife has and does counseling, my daughter, so I've been around it a little bit even in my own family. One of the biggest barriers to wanting to do that is, one, you got to admit the need. Two, you got to decide that you're going to accept help. What can you say to people who are just teetering and saying, well, you know what, I ought to have this. I've been through so much, surely I can handle this. I'm not going to let my thoughts get me down. How do you get people to break the barrier to maybe seek some help like you offer?
I say, you know what, if you have just any experience, just having a conversation about your experience. We don't have to go deep into all your issues, right? We go with where you're comfortable. I also tell my clients too, right? I mean, these diseases are up and down, right? So when you're having a down period, yeah, you're probably going to want to talk to me. But when you're having a high and you're doing well, you know what? I'm the last person you're going to want to talk to, because I'm going to remind you of everything that you've had to deal with because you need to talk about it. So I always say to my clients, when you're having a bad spell, I'm here. When you're having a good spell, I understand you don't want to talk. I get it. Just make sure, that you keep me in the loop, so I keep you on the caseload. So when you do have a bad moment, I'm here. You can come back anytime. I get it. So, just it's not like, okay, we need to meet each other week after week after week. It could be like,
Right.
you know what, there might be some months we see each other 3 months in a row, week after week after week. And then we might go like 3-4 weeks because you're doing great, you're feeling great, things are great. That's great. Live your life. And when you get those pockets of normalcy, grasp onto them and go for it. But when something tweaks and you need to see me again, come on in and see me. And I say, if you're teetering on the brink, I don't run my therapy sessions like therapy. Well, we're doing therapy, but we feel more like we're having more of a conversation.
Right.
And we go where you need to go. Right. So if you want to just open up and say, you know what, I've had these experiences, I'd like to talk about this, that's where we go. Right. And then if you start getting more and more comfortable that you want to get into some things that have really been bothering you, or some things start coming up, we work through them together.
Right. Well, tell me then.
People through these feelings, so it's not so scary.
Okay. You mentioned that you do telehealth, you do via Zoom, which is something that we've all learned to accept in the last 2 years. And for me, if it's a medical doctor, a lot of times I'm hesitant because, for example, my cardiology follow-up appointments, I need to have an EKG, an echo, I need some practical, evidential things done. So those don't always work well. But for something like this, I think it works very well. Tell me about what a typical, let's imagine that I connected with you. We agreed that I would be receiving some assistance, some counseling. Tell me what one of those sessions might look like.
Well, first of all, excuse me. I start where you want to start, to be honest. So maybe you have one thing that's particularly bothering you that day. Maybe you wanted to do a specific job, but you weren't able to get it because, the environment or whatever was not conducive to your health. And maybe that was really bothering you that day. So that's where we start. We start right there. Maybe you come to me and you say, I have 3 things that are really bothering me. So I would say, okay, which 3, of the 3 things, which do you say is bothering you the most? And then you would tell me that. And then we talk about that. And as you start telling me what's happening with you, I listen and we'll do a conversation. I'll maybe give you some suggestions. I'll give you some feedback, maybe of a different perspective. I ask you a lot of questions. I'm a big question asker because sometimes when I ask you a question, it can help you think about it from a different perspective. And that's me coming at it, like I said, from the outside in, looking in that window in from outside and seeing something different that maybe you're seeing inside the house, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So I'll ask you a lot of questions. A lot of times my clients will, just have emotion come up and we'll process those emotions. And sometimes we don't even know where these emotions are coming from. It's just our body releasing stress, and that's okay. If you don't know where it's coming from, we just sit with it and let it come up and get you some sort of relief.
Right. And people deal with their emotions so much differently. I know I'll just say, I'll just admit out loud, for me, when I get under extra stress, or at least, I get to that place, for me, it would be more like an anger outburst, leave me alone, stay away from me. Others might have the, what we call in the South, the crying fit. Others might just shut down. And I can see that within my own family, not to call any family member names, but I deal with things much differently than my son does or than my daughter. And so having someone like you who sounds like you see that, you anticipate that, and just letting those moments happen probably would be the key to the way you deal with people, right?
Yes, and oftentimes when you have an anger fit or we have a crying fit, there's something underneath that. Mm-hmm. That is what we call like the pressure cooker going over, right? We are suppressing something that is bothering us, but we don't want to acknowledge it at the moment. So it explodes in a fashion of either anger or crying or internalizing it or stress or maybe eating too much or not eating at all or sleeping too much. There's a lot of ways our body sends us messages and our mind that we need to address something.
Right.
And we do that. We work through that, but we work through it in a manner that's safe and that is not overwhelming.
Right.
And another thing I like to do with my clients is basically, as long as it's mutually acceptable, I provide them homework, because therapy isn't always just you go to the session, you talk about something, and you leave. We talk about goals. What would you like to accomplish? What would you like therapy to do for you? And we set goals, and in between our sessions, we'll talk about you doing something. Maybe you'll start spending time in nature. Maybe it'll be journaling. Maybe it'll be figuring out what kind of hobbies you like. I mean, for example, what if you're coming out of surgery and all of a sudden your favorite hobby you can no longer do because of the after effects? Then, we have to go back to the drawing board and take a look at what you like now, what interests you. And some of these things come about organically, and we need to be patient, but we also need to recognize it and be open to it. And that's kind of what we do. And I help you open up and look at these kinds of things.
Okay. So I'm supposing that I've reached out to your services and these, you're going to start with that, letting me do what I need to do, talk about what I need to, you deal with that obviously very well. But how long would a typical session last? Or if you were just to stand back and say, okay, let's get this process started, would you say you need to meet with me an hour a week, once a week, or what do you suggest as a kind of a starting point? I know you said you'd be very flexible later, but what should someone expect?
My sessions last about last about 45 minutes a session, because by the time the 45 minutes is done, you don't realize it, but you've done a lot of work. And sometimes my clients are tired or they're rejuvenated, one or the other. They may go over a little bit over 45 minutes, depending on what's going on, because sometimes people can get really upset and emotional. And I don't like to let them leave in a state that they're uncomfortable or having a lot of emotion and not being able to work its way through. So sometimes, I'll extend it a little longer because I want to make sure that when you're done with the session, you're settled emotionally. You're not, in the middle of a crime jag and me saying, okay, well, we got to stop now, because emotion isn't, we're human. You can't just turn off emotion sometimes. Right. So we do work to have it be 45 minutes. And then, as far as how often, it really depends. That is something that I talk about with each client specifically. And what's going on. If you're really having a lot of issues you're working through and it's really affecting your personal life, I'll say, okay, let's meet every week for a little while until you feel stabilized, so to speak. But if you're like, what, I'd like something consistent that, I'd like to just meet every other week, I'm good with that too.
Right.
My feeling is my clients are the best judge of how they're doing. And if they feel that they've gotten to a point that they're comfortable and they don't need to meet every week, then that's their decision. That's not mine. You're in control of your journey with me. I'm here to help you and, walk alongside you and, help you through these things and help you build resiliency so that you can get some joy and happiness going forward.
Right. So very similar then to, for example, me going to my cardiologist. If I go in and everything comes back clear, I'm doing well, then obviously he or she's going to offer me, well, why don't you come back in 6 months or a year? And generally, I've got great doctors, and they'll say, how do you feel about that? And I may say, no, I need to come back in 2 weeks. They're flexible, and that's exactly, we've got to deal or learn to deal, probably a better way of saying that. Many of us have to learn to deal with our emotions in a similar manner that we do to our physical, that when something comes up, if you get a fever, what are you going to do? You're going to either start taking some Tylenol and stuff at home, or you're probably going to contact your doctor. Why not treat our emotional lives in a similar way, that when we're having struggles, you don't feel bad about reaching out and getting help, or in some cases, I know, taking some medication that maybe you've already been prescribed.
And that's, one of the things we have to keep in mind is this issue is a lifelong issue, right? So I understand that life happens and there's going to be periods. And like I said, it's going to be up and down. So for me to say, okay, a typical thing is 6-8 weeks and you're good to go. Well, you know what? 6-8 weeks. Yeah. Okay. We could have taken care of one issue you have going on. But you know what? In 3 months from now, something else could pop up and you may want to come and see me for another 6-8 weeks to work through that. And I understand that this is not something that, is like a broken arm that, okay, you need to see me for the 6 weeks while the arm heals as you cope with having to use one arm. No, This is something that is being lived with lifelong. And that's one of the things is that I'm here to stay, right? I'm here for a long time. So I know that clients could see me, say 12 weeks, 20 weeks, 30 weeks a year, but they may see me for 10 years in that fashion. So I'm here to stay. So like I say, the door is open for when you're going through a low point. Sometimes coming during a high point is a good idea because we can talk about what you're doing that's making life so good so that when you do experience a lull, you can kind of build back up and know what works to make yourself feel better again. But I'm basically here when people need me.
Exactly. And that's a good thing to know. As you referred to several different times in our conversation already, you may have someone in your life, like your spouse or like a parent or whomever, who they're there they're there
Mhm.
physically around you, but you don't always feel comfortable with that. And so to have someone that you can get comfortable with into telling anything, and then have access to that, that's a good service to be able to grab hold to.
Well, the other thing we want to be cautious of too is that we don't want our spouse to step in the role as our caregiver permanently.
Hmm.
It happens, we're forced into it after a surgery at times, but to have that permanently interrupts the role of the spouse or partner relationship, right? I mean, you didn't marry or you aren't partnered with this person to have them take care of you. You're partnered because you want to contribute 50%. So being able to come and talk to someone like me about your fears, your concerns, and work through those things, because with that, you can go back and bring back to your relationship that emotional 50% that you want to contribute. So you can be
Hmm.
there for your spouse in a healthy emotional and mental manner.
Okay.
So that is one of the things that is helpful about going and talking to someone that is not in your family, and you can be very forthright about anything that's on your mind. There's no boundaries, there's no parameters. It's not like you have a friend that you can talk to a friend about these things, because friends require reciprocity, right?
Hmm.
A friendship is give and take. Well, maybe you just need to just take, and you really don't want the mental anguish of doing the reciprocity with your friend for their issues. You just need to unload yours. And that's where, again, I come into play. You can just come in, get what you need, and then you can go back and live your life.
Right. And that brings up another thought, at least for me. I know my wife has dealt with many years with a chronic illness, and of course, myself going through transplant. One of the things that we've experienced, I know many do, is that if you, I almost said make the mistake. I don't think it's making a mistake, but you feel as if sometimes that if you go too far with that friend, you end up turning into the one who's looked at differently, or they see you more
Mhm.
sympathetic. And a lot of times my wife, she's experienced that she doesn't get invited to participate in this or that because people say, well, she's already having enough on her plate, or me, well, he probably wouldn't want to go hunting because I know he can't walk him down the ravines like we do. So just don't worry about it. When we want to be included, we want to be
Absolutely.
our own judge of what we're capable of doing or not, and not to have people look at us as, well, that's the sick guy.
Exactly. And that's part of the dichotomous part of it, right? I mean, we'll show up and we'll have dinner with someone and we'll look like nothing is wrong with us whatsoever. But there is, we struggle, but we don't want our friends to be, and for lack of a better word, we don't want the pity,
Hmm.
right? We want to be known again as an equal. You want to be invited to that hunting trip because you can do a portion of it, and you want them to be able to just give you the space to do that portion of the trip. You want to be involved, and it's that lifelong struggle, right? It goes back to the little kid that can't participate in organized sports. So we want to do everything so that we can present ourselves as active, able participants. And when you start telling your friends about, well, I need this procedure, I need that procedure, this is a problem, that's a problem, and I'm really stressed out about it, it's like some things can't go unsaid.
Hmm.
They remember that, they don't forget it. And they they mean well, they're being protective, they don't want to hurt your feelings, they don't want to put you in a bad spot. But it just kind of goes back to that thing where, you know, no one understands unless it's someone that actually has experienced it or can relate to it. And that's where, therapy comes in. And that's, like I said, that's why I said I get a lot of people that say, no one gets it. I've gone to a therapist, but they just don't get it. I went twice, but I could tell they didn't get it. So I just went on my own and just, leveled up and had the surgery done,
Hmm.
just dealt with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned earlier, I'm backing up to more of uh, that main discussion was to let me understand what you're like, and everybody else that may watch this. Um, you got into this really because you saw a very specific need. You saw something that was missing. That's the same reason I got into this channel itself. I saw that there was not a lot of been there doing that type of participation as far as transplant information. So you got into this for that reason. What drives you to just keep going in this? Because you deal with, once you hear all this, you can't unhear it, right? I know you've got to have a special face for that.
Yeah, and that is true. I have this uncanny ability, excuse me. I have this uncanny ability to compartmentalize, right? I can put myself in my client's shoes and understand it from their perspective. And I can remove my own personal feelings from it that I experience. I don't know how to describe it, but I can step into your shoes, for example, and if you start telling me what you're experiencing, I can empathize and I can understand your experiences and I can almost feel them. And I come at it from your perspective. But what I don't do is I don't relate my personal experiences to your experiences because they are yours and they're separate from mine. And I have to deal with my own somewhere else. And that's part of it. And I also, going to school for so long and practicing for so long, I train for that. And I also teach. I teach master's students in social work at 2 universities.
Okay.
So we call this transference and countertransference. So I am trained not to transfer my experiences onto you or having your experiences transfer onto me. So that's how I deal with that. I will also tell you that, I do have rituals I do for self-care that I release those kinds of things. For example, I like to walk or bike every day for at least an hour. And that kind of unburdens some of those things. Because, when I do meet with people, I have empathy and I can I connect with them in an appropriate manner. But I also, I need to release that stress of, being there for that person. And I need to be calm and I need to let that person experience their emotions and I need to be their support. So that's how I kind of balance out that aspect of it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes very much sense to me. You've got to be able to do that. Of course, my wife works in social work and again, from a different perspective, but that's one of the harder things that she's gotten better at is, walking out of the office at whatever time that might be and trying to close those doors and just, you can open the same door in the morning, but you got to close it now. You've got to let that go for a little bit. So, tell me a little bit.
But it's not like that I just completely,
Right.
forget my clients. If I see something or, I'm constantly reading, something will make me think of one and I'm like, oh, we should talk about that in the session or that. But I understand that it's their life and it's their issues. And I have another circle over here that's my life. And they can overlap a little bit because obviously I'm telling you quite a bit about myself. So there's a lot of self-disclosure going on, but it's to the benefit for my client. It's not to my benefit.
Okay. Do you work with, what do you do? Do you group counseling, family counseling, individual?
I do it all. I do
all
group,
of the above?
I do family, I do individual, and I will do children as long as I can, connect with them on Zoom.
Right.
But yes, I do children and, even the older population, older adults, all of it, because everyone is having a different experience with this disease or a transplant depending on their life stage. And that's where I'm coming at it from, because really the major issue is the disease or the transplant that's impacting even family dynamics. I do family therapy because if you have little Johnny that has a congenital heart disease, that impacts the family system.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents don't realize the impact it has on the other siblings, on the parents themselves. And I can take a look at that system and break it down and analyze it and say, okay, this is what's happening. And, have you thought about this or that? Or, how to like get your system to function, more healthy.
Yeah, that's tremendous because looking in from the outside, I think when I was going through the major part of my journey, which was about 6 years between, well, I was congenital, but 6 years between hearing the phrase, you're going to need a heart transplant until I actually got it. It's about 6 years. And then, especially when it kind of came down to the wire those last several months, I think everybody looked in from the outside and said, well, oh, look at what Jim's going through. Look at what his wife's going through, his children. I mean, my daughter practically missed the fifth grade over it because she would either not want to go to school or we could take her to school, but she'd spend the day crying in the principal's office, that kind of thing. And so it was I said then, seeing that from the outside, transplant can be more difficult on those on the outside than the one laying in the bed sometimes.
Exactly. And that's where the family therapy comes in, because what I can do is I can come in and I can see that going on and I can say, okay, how do we help her? What are her fears? How do we help her through this?
Mm-hmm.
And, and how as a family can you guys do some different activities or different things, how you handle things to do that? And I take a look at it from, okay, I see what everyone's going through and how do you kind of put that together so it can function in a healthy manner to get through this period.
Right. That's excellent. It's a lot of different situations for everybody, and to build, again using my own example, if I got all the counseling and then my family got none, that might be even a more imbalance because I'm going around saying, "What are y'all so worried about?" I feel well. They're dealing with a different perspective on all this, so that's great. How if someone wanted to get in touch with you, what do they need to do? What's the first step?
They can actually call me. My phone number, we can put it up there. It's 707-815-0374.
Okay.
They can also email me, csmorra@heartandmindcounseling.com.
Okay.
And I'm very accessible to clients if you call me, I'm the one answering.
Yeah.
So it's pretty simple. I like that because then you get me right away. If you leave me a message, I'll call you back within 24 hours.
Okay.
And if I can't get back to you fully, you'll at least get a call or a text saying, when can we chat?
Right. Okay. How about the internet? Website, Facebook pages,
Yes.
social media?
We have a website. It's www.heartandmindcounseling.com.
Okay.
And we are on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, I'll try to get links beneath the video in the description for all that type of stuff, so it'll be a little more easy to access and that sort of thing. So anyway, if you didn't figure that out after this discussion, basically when I heard about Corrine, I heard about the things that she's able to do and the services she offered. I thought, hey, this is something I could use, and I'm sure that many of you could use as well. So being that you're specializing and pointing yourself more in the direction of this, pediatric or cardiac, not cardiac, but a chronic illness transplant, I think that's wonderful because not everybody can do this and not everybody has a perspective that you do. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to do it. I would really like to have people have a different experience coming up through this than I did. I really would like people to have a better experience and be able to get some assistance and not struggle so much and not go into periods of despair or hopelessness, to just know that they can persevere and they can be successful and they can have a happy life.
Exactly. And it takes taking care of all of ourselves, not just part of ourselves, to do that. And you're definitely,
absolutely,
I'm sure, a huge asset to making that possible. So, Corinne, it was great to talk with you today. Great to be able to share a little bit about you. If you got any more questions, again, everything will be in the links in the description below. phone numbers, that sort of thing will be popping up on the screen, so you can check those out. And I look forward to maybe talking with you again. Maybe we can get into more specific topics a little bit later and just share a little bit more about some of the tools people can use, even if they don't, they're not up to the whole jump in with both feet, but maybe just kind of get started on the path to get in the right direction.
I do want to mention, I do have a group starting at the end of January for congenital heart disease clients. So, and it is via Zoom, and it's for those living in Alabama, Florida, and Michigan, and hopefully my license in Georgia will come through in time for that. It's 8 weeks. So I can send you the information for that too.
Oh, sure. That'd be great. Send links or whatever information. I'll be happy to share that a little bit later. But I appreciate everybody watching today and joining in with us a little bit. And obviously, Dr. Corinne, definitely appreciate you and all that you're doing to help the entire community and to make our lives a little bit easier than perhaps it would have been otherwise.